New York in the 1980s, a bustling and tense city. When night fell over Central Park, the green space of the city became a gathering place for criminal gangs. On the night of April 19, 1989, a girl was found bound and gagged, naked, in a ravine in the northern part of the park. Her name was Tricia Maley. The victim was severely beaten with her eye sockets crushed and her skull fractured, losing 75% of her blood. The doctors said that the victim's chances of survival were very low, and even if she woke up, Tricia would be in a vegetative state. After 12 days in a coma, Tricia woke up and she did not remember anything about the attack. However, the police at this time proceeded to arrest 5 children aged 14 to 16, creating a crime scenario despite lacking sufficient evidence to charge them. The case of the 5 children in Central Park is one of the most controversial cases in American history. What happened that night? How the children were forced into crimes they did not commit. Tricia Maley was an accountant at a bank, and on the night of April 19, 1989, she worked until 8 p.m. before heading home. But Tricia didn't rest immediately. Right after that, she went out for a run, taking her usual route from home to Central Park where she could enjoy nature and gaze at the city at night with its lights. The skyscrapers. Central Park. The Central Park is a vast green space located in the heart of New York's bustling metropolis, an ideal place for people to retreat to after a tiring day at work. Before Tricia was discovered to have been assaulted, the New York police received a call reporting a group of about 30 to 40 youths causing disturbances in the park, with these teenagers of African American and Hispanic descent attacking homeless people, cyclists, and robbing them. The police quickly arrived and restored order. They handled the situation swiftly because this was not the first time they had faced a chaotic crowd of people of color in this area. Many young people were taken to the station afterward. However, the troubles in Central Park had not yet ended. Before midnight, the assault and rape of Tricia Maley were discovered. The forest inside the park was completely sealed off to search for any remaining evidence. The suspects have been identified, including Kevin Richardson and Raymond Santana. 14 years old were detained at the station for being involved with the group of teenagers who caused trouble the night before. The other 3 were later identified as 15-year-old Yusef Salaam, 16-year-old Korey Wise, and 15-year-old Antron McCray. All 5 were minors, with the oldest being white at 16. The 5 teenagers were still unaware of the trouble they were about to face. At first, all 5 were detained in the same room, but then each one was separated into individual rooms for interrogation. The police began to mention the woman discovered in the park and asked if they knew anything about it. None of the 5 teenagers admitted to it. The police continued to question the reason the 5 were in the park. They wanted to rely on the testimonies of all 5 teenagers to find the loopholes and the truth behind everything, but too many troubles occurred that night. A woman was beaten to near death, and many others were harassed. 1 year ago, the crime rate in New York reached a record high, with 1,896 murders, which prompted the police found the perpetrator of the serious cases. Perhaps that's why they couldn't keep their composure during the interrogation. They were somewhat aggressive when interrogating to get the answers they wanted. Raymond Santana recalled that moment during an interview with ABC. The investigator started getting angry, slammed his hand on the table, and said that I had to confess to what he wanted and lunged towards me. For 15 and 16-year-old teenagers, being continuously interrogated by inspectors for hours on end is not at all simple. Hours passed, and the 5 children were not provided with food or water, nor were they allowed to see their guardian. The inspectors were also gradually losing patience. An inspector took out a photo of Richardson, claiming that he was the suspect. The scratch on Richardson's face was evidence that the woman had resisted, and then he prompted Santana. The inspector gave me the names, and I just put them into my statement. If they gave me 100 names, I would include all of them in the scene. When given that the police promised that they would let him go home, Santana recounted the entire case despite not knowing anything about the names provided by the police. At this point, a scenario was constructed. Santana saw a woman jogging in black pants and a white shirt, when a young black man named Richardson, with a scar on his face, suddenly approached and hit her with a metal pipe. Then another young man named Antron came over and tore her clothes, and another person raped her. These 3 testimonies belonged to Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, and Korey Wise, respectively. He spread her legs, then Antron climbing on top. At that moment Richardson was raping her. It was Kevin, right? No, I mean Rayball, Tip, and Rayball. Every time the police came and interrogated someone, they would hear that someone else was the one who directly raped the victim. In a 2016 interview with The Guardian, Salaam said, "I heard them beating Korey Wise in the next room, They came to look at me and said, "You know you're next." The fear made me feel like I really couldn't get through it. The boys thought that was the end of it. They are witnesses. They recounted what they knew about the case as the police requested, but then everything took an unexpected turn. The inspectors believed that all 5 teenagers were involved in the beating and rape of Tricia Maley. Despite inconsistencies in the testimonies, the police obtained a tape recording of the confessions of the 5 individuals. Each detail in the tape was pieced together, and the police had a complete story of the crime. The case of the 5 teenagers being identified as the perpetrators of an assault and rape. Sirius has attracted the full attention of the press. This case at that time had all the elements to dominate the front pages of all newspapers, with the media using the worst words to talk about the 5 detained teenagers. Richardson, McCray, Santana, Wise, and Salaam had no prior criminal records. They were just ordinary kids starting high school, but now in the eyes of everyone, these black teenagers have become a real concern as crime rates in New York are high, and they are called harsh names. And somewhat racist. Salaam recalled in an interview, "If we were white kids, they might have contacted and found a lawyer for us, but because we come from the Black and Latino community, no one cared. They were just 2 black teenagers and 2 Latino kids causing trouble. After all, they were all criminals anyway." The 5 children bore the brunt of the outrage. The newspapers at the time had a timeline based on the information provided by the police about the case. Around 8:55 p.m., the group of teenagers attacking the elderly in great detail. From the location where they attacked the homeless to the spot where they pushed cyclists, the scenario was constructed in great detail, but then a loophole appeared. They began to trace the usual running route of Tricia Maley. If she had followed that route, the victim would have been at the location where they found her around 9:20 p.m. According to that timeline, the group of teenagers was still in the park, and even in the video recording their testimonies, the children were not clear. The crime scene investigation took place where the DNA results collected from the scene did not match any of the 5 individuals. This is impossible. 5 children cannot brutally beat and rape the victim without leaving any DNA traces, yet the case was still initiated. A reporter recounted the incident. "People were so outraged that they no longer cared about true fairness or justice, and with the media relentlessly covering the story, they believed that children had to be punished." June 1990, more than a year after the incident. The discovery of the wrongful convictions of McCray, Santana, and Salaam took place. Outside the project room, the scene was extremely chaotic with many groups of protesters. Yusef Salaam's mother answered reporters outside the courthouse, "There is no concrete evidence to show anything other than the conclusion of the case being innocent. Yusef is innocent." Many people from the African immigrant community also protested, demanding the release of the 5 teenagers, while another group came to seek justice for Tricia and hoped that the suspects would receive a fair sentence. The victim Tricia Maley, after a long recovery, also appeared as a witness. Her presence raised hopes for many, but unfortunately, the trauma from the attack was still too great. Tricia did not provide any testimony, and all 3 teenagers retracted their confessions in court, claiming that at the time, the police had promised them freedom. However, no police officer admitted to that promise, and after several days of deliberation, the jury concluded that the 3 teenagers McCray, Yusef, and Santana were guilty of raping and assaulting Tricia Maley. In addition, they also attacked 2 other men that night. All 3 were sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison, the maximum sentence for minors. The trial of the other 2, Richardson and Wise, took place 2 months later. Richardson faced 8 charges, including rape and sexual assault, with a sentence ranging from 5 to 10 years, while Wise, being 16 at the time, received an adult sentence of 10 to 15 years, with no miracle occurring. 12 years after the case, which had been forgotten by many, was suddenly reopened with a step. An unexpected twist. Matias Reyes, a convicted rapist and murderer serving his sentence in prison, claimed that he was the real perpetrator of the 1989 Central Park attack. He was also convicted for a rape that occurred 2 days before Tricia's case, but Matias Reyes was never on the police's list of suspects at that time. Unlike the fabricated testimonies of the 5 teenagers, Matias Reyes confessed that he committed the crime alone and described Maley's route. The position where she ran past, and then he used something to knock her unconscious and dragged her along a stretch of road. He also described exactly what Tricia was wearing that day, even details that the police did not know before were revealed. For example, the music player that Tricia was carrying while running, or Reyes had removed the victim's shoes before assaulting her, which explains why Maley's shoes were found outside. The police department began reviewing old files to reinvestigate the case, and they discovered semen stains from the scene. The case matches Matias Reyes, everything he confessed is true. Previously, Matias Reyes had coincidentally met Korey Wise, one of the 5 convicted teenagers in prison. Perhaps this meeting made him realize it was time to tell the truth to exonerate the 5 innocent people. When I met Korey Wise in prison, I saw the frustration that man had endured for 13 years for a crime he didn't commit. Those kids were convicted for things they didn't do. I just did everything I could. Maybe that's the confession of the truth. This is the true perpetrator of the Central Park case. On December 19, 2002, a New York Supreme Court judge overturned the convictions of the 5 previously accused men. Going back to the interrogation process of the police, they coerced the teenagers into confessing. New writer, the advisor of the documentary about the Central Park 5 case, explained in an interview, all 5 teenagers suspected of not knowing each other, so the police took advantage of this to make them turn against each other. For example, they lied that Richardson was the perpetrator when interrogating Santana, and if Santana testified that he was present at the scene witnessing the crime, he would be set free. Thus, all 5 teenagers confessed that they were present at the scene and participated in the crime process but did not directly rape the victim. Additionally, a study by Florida International University also indicated that juveniles are 2 to 3 times more likely to confess to crimes they did not commit compared to adults. At that time, these teenagers were quite exhausted and anxious after being interrogated for many hours continuously, so they chose to confess. Matias Reyes, the actual perpetrator, was not prosecuted for the assault and rape of Trisha Maley because the statute of limitations had expired, while the 5 wrongfully accused teenagers have now grown up. They have also served their unjust sentences for many years, and after being released from prison, they all struggled to reintegrate into society and find employment. However, the revelation of the true perpetrator is a bright spot in their lives, all 5. The latter subsequently filed a civil lawsuit against the city of New York and received $41 million in a settlement agreement. The oldest, Korey Wise, received the highest compensation amounting to $12.2 million, while the other 4 each received $7.1 million. However, that amount of money will probably never be enough to compensate for the humiliation they endured. Kevin Richardson sadly shared, "I lost my youth, I lost 7 years of my life." Korey Wise, 10 years after being exonerated, said, speaking from the heart in the documentary Central Park 5, "You can forgive but you can't forget. I can't forget the things that were taken from me, the life I could have enjoyed or the time that has passed. No matter how much money you have, you can't get it back." The case is a shining example illustrating the racial disparity in sentencing and the inequality of the American criminal justice system. Although the city of New York does not acknowledge any wrongdoing by the police department and prosecutors behind the crime, would like to conclude here.